This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 337, the Friday, May 18th version, the Preakness version, the World Horse Player Tour Preakness event version, whatever you want to call it. Peter Thomas Fornatel back with you from Pasadena, looking out at the San Gabriel Mountains covered in fog at the moment that will hopefully burn off and we can have another lovely day here in Southern California, hoping to avoid any issues with dodgy hotel Wi-Fi. So far, so good. Bringing in my guest, coming from the same location, not in the same room, because I forgot to bring that little splitter where we can actually both sit in the same room and talk to producer Craig. So we're each in our own rooms here at the Do's It. He's the people's champion. He's Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
I mean, I can come over there, Pete, but the problem is I just have on my underwear at the moment, so I figured that I was better off in my own room.
That's okay. I've seen it all before, JK. So it's but I think this is a pretty good setup. And I forgot I had a line I was going to introduce you with. I had a whole thing of show notes today, Jonathan, that I was going to the whole thing was planned out, like basically to the minute, all my handicapping thoughts, some questions about the WHT tournament, and I had a new line for you. So I'm gonna just go back and introduce you again. I'm gonna introduce you again because I wanted to get in there just because it's so timely. Though it would have been a much better joke on Wednesday before I saw similar iterations of this same joke on horse racing Twitter. Well, let me just go back and do it again. All right. And joining me today, as always, my co-host. He doesn't hear Yanni. He doesn't hear Laurel. He simply hears Pimlico. Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
I do actually hear Yanni. I don't even understand why it's Laurel. I don't
you got to play with the frequency, man. We'll get it going in the Logan Suite today. It's kind of a wild thing when you start playing around with the pitch on that little audio file going around. It's a lot of fun. But all right, we're out here in California, but the eyes of the racing world are back east at Baltimore. I say we just dive right in and start talking about this important 3-year-old dirt route horse race that's going to be going down Saturday afternoon, the Preakness Stakes. Now, Good Magic joining the party certainly adds a wrinkle, but this is really Justify's race to lose. What percentage of your play, JK, in the Preakness is going to be going through Justify and Justify alone on top?
Yeah, all of it. I mean, if Good Magic does win, I think that the odds of him winning, it probably won't be worth the chances of him winning won't reflect his odds. So it'll be all Justify for me. And if he loses, then there'll be other great opportunities to wager. I wouldn't really think that this is some great opportunity to beat him.
But do you have any fears about Justify between the foot bruise, which he seemed to bounce back very quickly from, between the idea of the 2 weeks, coming back in 2 weeks when he has so many races in a short period of time, the possibility of a bounce, anything like that? Do any of that stuff give you pause when it comes to assessing Justify's chances?
I mean, it's a little bit of a concern, but at the same time, I mean, he's been galloping around there just fine, and I've talked to some people with better opinions about horse flesh than I do and say that everything looks to be going the right direction. So I'm not too worried about it.
And any of those other things, I mean, or do you just feel like this horse is, machine-like enough that he's just going to keep running his race?
Yeah, no, I think he's absolutely going to just keep running his race. I mean, the race that he ran last time with the pace that he ran, going 1.25 miles in his 4th career start, was super impressive, and you have to think that he's going to improve off of that. I don't see a world in which he regresses, especially for a trainer like Bob Baffert. I think he'll only improve. Now, is there some other things that could happen? Sure. I just don't think that those things will happen, and I'm not going to wager that they're going to happen. I mean, it's not going to be a big betting race for me anyways. I mean, I'll probably single on the pick 6 and be a fan at that point, but I don't find it to be some great betting opportunity that people need to be lining up to try to beat this horse.
Let's talk about the race vertically for a second. I know you're more of a horizontal player, But when you look at this race in terms of exactas and trifectas, do you have any ideas that might be a little more clever, something where you just single, justify on top, and play horses underneath?
Yeah, no, I think that if you're trying to hit this race, and this race always feels that way to me, is it needs to kind of be like an ice cold situation where you try to hit the if you're $100 budget, you try to hit the exacta for $75 with Justify and Good Magic cold, and then or you spend $75 and tries using Justify with Good Magic with a couple of long shots. I mean, those are the types of ways that I think you would bet that in an inter-race situation. So, I would probably try to hit the super in this race if I was playing it in that situation with just Justify with Good Magic with some Lone Sailor or some Sporting Chance, things like that in behind. But like I said, there's a lot of great opportunities that we come across in this game, and I just don't really think this is a huge one. I think this is more of a day where I'll just be a fan and try to get alive to Justify in the picks.
Fair enough, but I'm sure there's a lot of people tuning in specifically to hear betting strategy for the Preakness, so I'm going to make you talk about it a little bit more, regardless of how you feel. So let's talk a little more Good Magic. You indicate that you think he'll be underlaid when it comes to the win pool. Do you feel like on form he has to run second?
Yeah, on form, obviously. I mean, he could get a poor trip, but he's tactical enough to get into a good position. I think that his performance should be upgraded a little bit from the Derby. I mean, he sat in behind and chased those fractions that Justify and Promises Fulfilled were setting. So he definitely can be upgraded there. I do think he had probably a better trip than Justify, like having cover and being able to shut off and then having a target to run at. Justify was doing that with nothing to run at. So but I do think that on class and on form, he's the second most likely winner. And he's also he's not like a winner run out type. I think he's the kind of horse that they could easily just run around there and chase Justify and finish. And he didn't give up in the stretch, so he's a quality animal. I think that he'll definitely be one that would probably going to run second in that race if Justify wins. And if Justify happens to stub his toe, no pun intended, he won't. He probably won't. I'm sorry, Good Magic is probably the one that can pick that up.
I feel like there is a scenario where Good Magic could run out, and there's two parts to the argument, and I'll make them to you, and you can tell me if you buy it or not. One part is as talented of a trainer as Chad Brown is, and actually his stats are not bad at all with horses coming back quickly, but there is this sort of feeling in my head, and I mentioned it for the first time on last Friday's show, of they're almost viewing this as a free roll when it came to the Preakness, because they knew they didn't want to run him in the Belmont, and whether they run here or not, the rest of his campaign is going to look pretty similar. But so it just leaves me with the idea that maybe this is, when you treat something as a free roll, it's like it can either work or it could not be his day, and you just won't see the form at all. It feels like they had him at, honed perfectly for the Derby. We discussed that possibility with Good Magic earlier in the year, that unlike so many of these Chad Brown older horses we've seen who arrived to the races off a layoff fully formed, this one was brought along to peak in the third start of the layoff. He did that, and it just feels to me like there's a little bit more guesswork for some reason when I'm assessing him. I can see a world in which he were to run a flat third. I mean, we've seen that move from him before. Before it was maybe because he was undertrained for coming back. Now maybe it could be because he was a little over the top and coming back a little quick. And then the other way I felt like he could run out is if he really tries to take the race to Justify and really tries to win the race. I was just curious what you thought strategically. If the way you described it, I'm imagining in your race design, you seeing him just sort of chasing him around there and trying to run at him in the stretch. But, if they really wanted to win the race, more aggressive tactics might be in order that could potentially lead to him, running third or worse. That's how I saw it.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there. To the point about Chad and this not being one of his moves is sometimes, we talk about it. It was a Buff Bradley thing when we discovered and fell in love with the Desidero. when it comes to like, this is not something he does often. So the fact that he's doing it almost gives me more confidence in it. It's like that he feels so good about the situation. He's an accomplished enough trainer that this is not an owner pick the spot. If he felt like there was something else to be accomplished, he would, I think he could get that point across. So, I think the horse is going to be fine. Yeah, it's not something he does very often, but and the other great point is that he waited to kind of tighten the screws with Good Magic. He like you said, he kind of designed it so that he would peak on Derby Day. Well, because he took his time getting to that peak, it doesn't feel as if he's going to boil over. It doesn't feel like he's going to be over the top now coming back in 2 weeks, that he should just be right on time. Maybe that was his best, and this maybe is a step below that. Or it's just the same race. It's in 2 weeks. He didn't work in between. He just galloped. You usually see that's what's tricky about the Preakness is the horses that run well in the Derby come back in 2 weeks and run well here. It's usually not a situation where the horses, they blow up.
Yeah, with the notable exception of the two Pletcher Derby winners in recent years, the record of horses exiting the Derby into the Preakness is very, very good, whether they've won it or even the also-rans. It does call into question the sort of modern tendency to give horses tons of space between races when you see how well they do this one time in their lives when they're asked to come back in 2 weeks. Now, that said, I'm not saying that there are people who will tell you that's proof that we're too easy on the horses and they should run more and all this stuff. I'm not going to go there simply because, yeah, they might be able to replicate that race 2 weeks later, but then what happens 2 months after that? I think it's possible, and I'd love to hear somebody like a Todd Pletcher speak to this idea that they might be able to do it, but it might take something out of them, take the starch out of them if you're thinking about having a later 3-year-old campaign or 4-year-old campaign. What's your view, JK, on whether or not the good record of horses wheeling back in 2 weeks reflects at all on modern training methods of typically giving horses a lot of time, where it sometimes feels like 4 weeks is a wheel back in the modern day?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, I definitely think that our horses could probably run more often. However, in this day of technology and percentages, I think that a lot of trainers are concerned about that. They don't want to give horses races. And when they put them on the track, they want to win. They care about their percentage. And rightfully so, they kind of have to be. I mean, unfortunately, they are it's a client-based business, and you have owners that are your clients, and you have a duty to make them happy, and you try to get new business, and you do that with your percentage. And you're, that's one of the ways that they do it. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. To your point about Todd Pletcher's two horses that did win the Derby that didn't run well here, I don't think that was a Todd thing. I think that was a horse thing. Super Saver got an unbelievable trip in the slop with a rail ride from Calvin Burrell, and Always Dreaming was on the goldenest of rails and has not won a race since then. So I think it's more of those two horses. But when you look at the horses that have won the Preakness or run well in the Preakness, they all have run well in the Derby for the most part. Exaggerator ran huge in the Derby. American Pharaoh, obviously. California Chrome. I'll Have Another. Bodemeister ran second there. Oxbow was a sneaky one. He actually ran well in the Derby. He had attended that pace, I believe, that Palace Malice set. He was one of the ones that stuck around. Shackelford ran well in the Derby. Looking at Lucky ran well, but had an awful trip. You can keep going. Big Brown, Curlin, who ran second to Street Sense. Who won when Street Sense was second. They all run well back in 2 weeks. The only two that didn't in the modern era are those two horses that had extreme, setups the race before.
Totally correct. And I didn't mean to impugn Todd with that comment. I was just pointing out that they are the notable exceptions to what seems to be the rule of the 2 week wheel back being a positive.
And to be fair, you could do Orb too. Orb didn't run well in the Preakness either, but that was
another horse who got the most unbelievable Derby setup you could imagine.
Absolutely. Animal Kingdom ran well in the Derby. In the Preakness. He was flashing. He was flashing at Shackelford. He just couldn't get past him.
Yeah. No, it typically is a good thing. If you were to say whether for the average horse, they typically hold. I would say if you looked at, I wish I'd done the study now, But if you looked at horses, the overwhelming majority of them held their form. I mean, Mind That Bird. How about that example? Talk about a horse with a perfect setup. Still ran unbelievable coming back in 2 weeks. Yeah, and
Rachel Alexandra
was a wheel back too, coming out of that smashing Kentucky Oaks win. So yeah, it does seem like these two probably have it over a barrel. I do have that one vision of how the 5, Good Magic, could run out. The horse that I'm going to mess around with, and what I'll do is I'll play some 7-5-2, and then I'll also play some straight 7-2, talking about Lone Sailor, who I've heard a lot of debate. We had both Mike Watchmaker and Andy Byer the other night talking about how the trouble they thought the trouble comment in the Derby, particularly they objected to the word stymied, and that truthfully isn't the word that I would use. But I did think it was a meaningful trip for Lone Sailor, and with a clean run, he wasn't going to win. He wasn't going to run in the top 3. But I do think he might have been able to get 4th with a clean run, and I think that might be good enough to get second here to justify, especially if Good Magic tries to win the race or is a little – you made a good point why he might not be over the top, but I'm still going to hold that idea that it's not inconceivable to me that he could run 3rd. Lone Sailor is the horse I want. Is there? And you mentioned 2 horses as ones to maybe mix in the exotics 3rd spot in the try. The way you see the race, who were they again?
Sporting Chance. I like Sporting Chance. That race he ran in the Pat Day Mile, you talk about traffic.
And he was wide. Was that the trip?
Yeah,
right.
It was super wide and kept running and I mean he got checked. He circled. He really ran well that day. So I prefer him. I think Lone Sailor, look, I liked him as a long shot opportunity in the Derby. He did miss the break.
Lone Sailor's been a very unlucky horse.
Very. But here's the thing, though. To me, that was a little bit of a false trip.
What do you mean?
Yes, he did have traffic, but they were flying in front of him. I mean, he got a setup. I mean, he was 15th and 12th early, 10 and 9 lengths off early in the race. And then he comes running late and he gets stopped a little bit. Like I don't see.
I didn't think he could really run. He looked full of run to me with nowhere to go for like a good portion of the turn. And I just feel like if he'd had clear running there, he would have been able to take advantage in the way that, Instilled Regard did. Again, I'm not saying he's going to finish in the top 3, but I think that what Mike Maloney would call in Betting with an Edge, the vice that he was in on that turn was really what kept him from getting the run that I'm envisioning, more so than getting stopped again, even though he did get stopped again. That was just sort of like,
I guess I'm fighting the notion that, and I'm not joking. I don't know if I sent you the picture. You might have been flying. You didn't see it. Yesterday at 8:16 a.m., I received 2 text messages from 2 completely different people saying the exact same thing. One said, "Okay, thanks. Going to go all in on Lone Sailor." and then another text from someone in a completely different state that were not together. This was not planned. Said, "All in on Lone Sailor." I got 2 texts at 8:16 a.m. at the exact same time. And I wasn't like, "Hey, who do you like in the Preakness to these people?" They literally unsolicited texted me that at the same time. So I think my hesitance is more or less just trying to prove them wrong. But
and maybe he's gonna be everybody's wise guy horse, and in that case, obviously, I'd like him less. But you keep in mind, I consider myself one of the bigger Lone Sailor fans, and not once in this conversation have I mentioned anything about the horse even winning the race. I'm talking about 2nd and 3rd here. I guess just because it's horse racing and you never know. If I were playing horizontals, I could include him for a penny, but I would caution against the all-in Lone Sailor scenario, but then again, I mean, hey, no guts, no glory, and those 2 friends of yours, I assume, will get to put a microphone in their face at the final table of the World Horse Player Tour Santa Anita event on Sunday, should that happen, because shortly an all-in Lone Sailor move is going to get you to that final 8, huh?
Yeah, I think that's probably overkill. I don't think you'll need that. I don't think you'll need an all-in Lone Sailor to make it there.
I hope both of them do it because they'll each be up there at the top with 100,000. For folks who don't know what we're talking about, there's still time to sign up for the Santa Anita Preakness contest. This is all money added. JK and I have been very involved with this from the beginning. great opportunity with all the money being added. Also, we're going to be filming it for a television pilot. Saturday, traditional live bankroll event. At the end of Saturday, everybody keeps their bankrolls. The top 8 players move on to the final table. At the final table, the bankrolls from Saturday essentially become just like chips in a poker tournament, mythical money that you use to play for the real money of the purse. And we've seen in our dry runs of this tournament format, obviously an advantage to have a big lead at the final table, but even big leads can erode. And what we like about that is you get an edge for doing well on Saturday, but the action is going to be forced on Sunday, and that's going to make for great TV. The other way, the action being forced, also borrowing directly from the poker world, we essentially have blinds. Really what they are is escalating minimum bets that function like blinds do in a poker tournament. You can still go all in at any time. If you have any questions about the format, if you're thinking about playing, hit us up, podcast at drf.com. You can find me at Looms Boldly, and JK is at UT Big Hair. You can sign up on the day all the way through. As long as you can make your 5 $1,000 bets for Saturday, you can still sign up. So I don't know. Do you know which race that will be that people can sign up until?
You know, I did know, but then Santa Anita adjusted their post times to have a break for the Preakness.
Oh, one of those.
So what I do know is that prior to them adjusting it, you were going to be able to bet the Preakness, and then you would still have 4 races at Santa left to get your 5. So I don't know that that's still the same because they've changed the post times. I would assume that it wouldn't change, but it could. So be aware of that.
But so in other words, it's going to probably be around 3 o'clock, maybe 3:30 local time. You could still buy in. I think on the day you might have to pay cash. These are good questions for Nate Newby. If you're interested, if you need his info, hit me up and I'll be happy to provide it. It's also in the article, the preview article I wrote about the contest. Another unique for horse racing element to this tournament is the opportunity to rebuy. And that same cutoff line that we just listed would be the cutoff to buy a second entry once your first entry is torched, very much following the poker model again. The rebuys cost $6,000. For that, you get your $5,000 rebought entry, and that extra $1,000 goes to the prize pool. JK, you're not eligible to compete in this tournament, but if you were, is the rebuy option one you'd consider? And what do you think the right strategy for this type of tournament is? Is it to be aggressive and take advantage of the rebuy opportunity? Is it to nurse along, see what amount is going to get you to the final table and bet aggressively late in the Santa Anita card? What advice would you give for people wondering how to approach this tournament?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because it depends obviously where you love something. You know, if you love something late in the card, that can make a huge difference. If you like something early, it just depends. I guess the way that I would probably try to do it is if I loved something early, I would probably try to look at an all-in move on the thing I loved early. And then, be really aggressive there. If it didn't work out, then come back and just kind of play a little bit more traditionally. So that's kind of how I would approach it. Or, or another strategy I maybe would do is maybe just instead of betting the $1,000 minimum, maybe double that. So just do $2,000 instead of betting $1,000, and see if you can get a little bit more accomplished and get a little further along. And if you happen to miss, then you just come back. It's tricky, because it's a new situation. So I don't really have a lot of, you obviously don't have a lot of experience in scenarios, but I hope that people will consider it. I do think that especially from a TV standpoint, that the one entry was just kind of a must. It's hard to explain to people how, Jonathan Kinchin number 2 is at the table. What does that mean? Oh, Jonathan Kinchin had 2 entries. He had 2 entries. Well, how did he? So I just think it's confusing. That felt really weird talking in the third person.
Oh, you love it. You always talk about yourself in the. I've heard you refer to yourself in the third person plenty. Let's not.
No, you haven't. So, go on. People
I've heard Jonathan Kinchin is ready for a sandwich. I've heard you say that. Jonathan Kinchin would like another scoop of ice cream. And then you expect Orchidia to run and get you one.
What if I was third personing, but I was referring to myself as the people's champ? the The Baron of Breakage wants a slice of pizza.
The good old Baron of Breakage. Well, this weekend, hopefully, we're not going to be having to call you, the Emir of main track onlys. Hopefully, we'll get some. Hopefully, we'll get all this turf racing in at Pimlico over the weekend. It sounds like there's a good opportunity that we will, and we're going to talk about the big turf race on Saturday in a minute. But before we move on completely from the World Horse Player Tour, I do want to throw out a compliment to you, JK. These jackets that you've procured for the winners, for the winner, singular, of the World Horse Player Tour, members only, very fresh. Where did this idea come from?
I was trying to think of something. There's trophies and there's watches and there's bracelets and there's championship belts and there's green jackets and red jackets and purple jackets, and I wanted to do something that was interesting. The members only jackets remind me of the first floor at your simulcast facility, and I just thought it would be kind of cool, kind of funny, but also hopefully we can make it something popular and people would really like it, and I think it's cool. I think it'll be cool. And like I said, you have to win to get one. It'll never be something that'll be sold. So hopefully we'll be able to keep them moving. We'll see.
I like it. You can see a picture of that jacket. Did you send that out on your personal Twitter, or did the Horse Player Tour Twitter send that one?
Yeah, the personal. I think the Horse Player Tour retweeted it, but it's I just sent it on my Twitter.
If you're interested in this contest, you're going to want to be following at Horse Player Tour on Twitter, and probably go ahead and follow us as well. We're hoping to do some video coverage, shoot some little live coverage things to send out there into the world Saturday and Sunday, just to keep people apprised of what's going on. You think we'll be able to accomplish that with everything else going on? It could be kind of cool. People could follow along from home.
Yeah, no, I think we'll be able to. I think we'll have a little help. So I think we'll probably be more active on Twitter than you would assume, considering our busy day. But no, I think we'll be able to try to get some updates on there, and obviously we'll retweet those from our accounts as often as possible. But we'll try to get updates. We'll also try to send out kind of a right when they break from the gate tweet of like what everyone played. That would be kind of cool Sunday too, so people can on Sunday people can kind of watch along.
Very fun. I like it a lot, and I'm looking forward to it finally being here. This has been in the planning stages for a while. It's finally here. You can still be a part of it. Reach out to Nate Newby at Santa Anita or us if you have questions. We'd love to have you. Interest has been very strong. I don't like to guess numbers of entries beforehand, but it sounds like Nate Newby and Tom Quigley have been pleased with the amount of entries that have signed up so far. Doesn't seem like there's been any drop-off from what they would normally get for a tournament like this, even though one entry as opposed to two. I think that's a really good sign. And then, of course, rebuys can continue to push this purse higher and higher. Holler at us if you have any questions about that. And with that, let's move on to the Dixie and the return to the races of a horse who's gotten about as much airtime on the show as American Pharaoh, I think. I'm talking about the great Divisadero appearing on Dixie Day. This race, superficially anyway, looks to be a match race, with him being one of the obvious contenders and World Approval being the other. I actually am going to go in a different direction here and take a little bit of a shot with Frostmourne, whose form might be a little bit dirtied up, I thought, after chasing loose heart to heart last time, has enough speed to get good position and finishes his races. Should be a good price because I could see the market going a little bit overboard on the big two here, especially World Approval, who looks loose and has the best form, but that last race just left enough questions that I'm not going to be in a hurry to jump right back on the World Approval bandwagon. JK, how did you see this one?
Yeah, I agree with you on Frostmourne. I think that he's probably the one that you would want to take a look at here.
No Divisadero? I'm shocked.
Well, here's my thing. So he wasn't ready to run 2 weeks ago on a turf course in which he's won 3 graded stakes and 2 grade ones and has never lost on Derby Day. And but he wasn't quite ready then. But then 2 weeks later, now he's ready to run in the Grade 3 Dixie. I just don't get that.
You took the words right out of my mouth. No, I mean, 2 weeks is a lot when it comes to horse training from, all the trainers I've spoken with and the trainer quotes you hear. It's not unreasonable that a horse needed what he or she was going to get in those 2 weeks, but it's still, it feels a little rushed. And then B, there's the pace scenario to consider. When you design this race in your head, what do you see?
Well, so I'll get to that in a second. He had 8 works leading up to where he could have run on Derby Day, and then he worked 2 half miles since then. So those 2 half miles are the reason. He's a play against for me in this spot. I probably sound a little bit annoyed by the fact that I don't understand the trainer change. I guess Buff's two grade ones weren't good enough. I find that to be very, very annoying. There was a world in which Frostmourne, back in the day at least, he used to feel like he was a little bit closer. So I don't know what'll happen there. It's IRAD, so I would imagine he won't be up and on it. But I don't really know who's going to go to the front. I guess maybe it doesn't seem like it's going to be too quick. World Approval's not slow early. I guess he could find himself on the front, and if he does, he might be pretty tough.
I was putting forth a world in which he'd be alone on the lead. You don't think that's the case?
I just wonder, if they, with a horse this talented. I mean, he hasn't been on the lead in the last 10 races.
No, but I mean, when you look at pace figures, it's just hard to see any of these going. And he's got some speed, and the idea that they'd want to do something different after the debacle last time, I'd be very surprised if he's not on the engine.
I agree, and he likes a little cut in the ground. I mean, he didn't like it at Santa Anita, but I don't think it was the ground. I think that was. Yeah, they had it at firm, but I was standing in the rain when he ran, so it definitely wasn't firm. It's a weird situation that horse. I'm very curious to see how he runs here. He was pretty bad last time.
JK's apostasy with the Divisadero shocking me, but it sounds like you would be inclined to include World Approval in multis, at least defensively, or would you oppose him?
No, I mean, I think you kind of have to use him. I mean, I think that they put this race where they put it for a couple of reasons. One being the weather, but I mean, it's weird because I don't know what to do with him. It's like he's either going to win by 6 or he's going to run third. With World Approval. There's only one horse in this entire world, you talk about for insurance and for mental insurance on who, you toss a horse in. And I typically tell you I don't agree with that. I think it's, you're wasting combinations and blah, blah, blah. This is one horse that I would have to put in for mental insurance. If he won and I didn't use him, that'd be tough.
You're talking Divisadero?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Divisadero. So, I think Frostmourne is the one that is the one that probably presents the most value. You're going to have to use World Approval just from the possible pace scenario. They're being cut in the ground and just the class alone. I mean, if you run this race a year ago and there's no way he loses. So I mean, no way he loses. So it's a tough race. I think Frostmourne's the one that you'd have to look at for some value.
Yeah, he'd be the key for me. But then I would definitely have some World Approval over Frostmourne. And then if I were playing some deeper exotics, I would play some stuff with World Approval nowhere, but I'd have at least one combination, with the idea being that maybe he's just not the same and he's ready for what comes next. But you would not want – I'd feel very silly actually losing really to either. I probably would save a little with Divisadero too, somewhat sentimentally, and then I think definitely World Approval just over him in one way, two one-way exactas and then some Frostmourne to win. That's how I'd be thinking of it. Let's go on to the Gallarette, which goes as race 9. For me, Cambodia was the standout in this one, JK. We don't talk that much about class and the idea of class in horse racing that much on this show, but I do think that there's an important class angle when you're looking at horses coming out of grade 1 races going down to grade 2s and grade 3s. I think sometimes that gap can be more than what some racing fans would even think it would be. And I think this is going to be a good spot for Cambodia to get back into the winner's circle. What did you think of the race?
Yeah, I gave the pick 6 on out of the gate. I only used 2 A horses here. I used her and Alicia's World. I know that our listeners are probably tired of hearing us talk about this workout angle stuff, but just the 2 examples we've given as of late haven't been good. But I think it's more than be tough.
It's more than 2 that have gone down in flames lately.
No, we had the Sister Charlie one, and then the Raving Beauty.
I feel like there's a couple others, but anyway, what is the angle with Alicia's World?
Well, just look who she's been working with. She's been working with your favorite filly Uni, that horse Africa for Chad, a Raving Beauty who we went the other way. She ran huge. Sister Charlie. I mean, the horse is working with some top class horses. It's Chad. I just think she's the same way. The same things you feel about Cambodia, I feel the same way. I feel the same way about Alicia's World. She's just better than the rest of these, except for Cambodia. I think one of those 2, one of them will get a trip and one of them will win. I am going to use Ultra Brat and Stallionaris underneath these like B horses. I think Stallionaris could be a little bit tricky if she slips away, and then Ultra Brat was wide on the Keeneland Turf course running against the 3 Chad horses last time, and the Jenny Wiley. So second off of a break for Grand Motion. This is what I'd imagine that this one will just van over the morning from Fair Hill. So kind of a home game for them. I think she could be a little bit tricky while the other ones are taking all the money.
My only fear about Alicia's World was trip and just being far back, where I think Cambodia will be able to secure a much better tracking spot early on. But I guess is your point, just with the way she's finished and the way Chad's typically finished, that she might just be able to mow them all down anyway?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I just think regardless, no one's going to take advantage of, in my opinion, of the slow pace. Maybe Stallionaris, but if she does, I worry about the whole Flo inviting those 2 talented fillies into the race. That's if she opens up, then she could be tough, but that part is a little bit concerning.
Yeah, I would definitely, for the way I see it, Alicia's World would be more of a saver for me for the reasons you said. And I think there might be a little, because of her being in the race, you might get a little value on Cambodia, who I just think has got to be in front and therefore has of Alicia's World, and therefore might have an opportunity to get a better trip. So I'd probably want, in an ideal world, use both as well, but definitely look to be pressing Cambodia for me more of a top pick. And it sounds like for you, you just use them exactly equally.
Yeah, I'm going to use them equally. I think that they'll both run well, and it'll be kind of a trip thing for them. Whoever gets the better trip, if it does happen to speed up, someone tries to quicken it up a little bit, and Cambodia moves early, or Alicia's World gets into trouble, or it's one of those deals where I'm not going to split hairs there.
That's reasonable. For some reason, it sticks in my head to do just that and try to split hairs and press a little. I guess just the idea of trying to get a little bit of a whiff of value, but on the one that I prefer. But your way makes equal sense, and folks can play it any way they choose. If you want to hear JK's whole Pick 6 ticket, we're going to make you watch Out of the Gate, which is already posted. And you can check out. Thank you, by the way, Jonathan, for pinch hitting for me yesterday when I was in transit. How'd you do? What did you talk about in my segment on Out of the Gate yesterday?
Yeah, I just talked about the contest itself. I was sweating. I did it from the Logan. I thought it'd be cool to do it at one of those tables where where it looks the tracks behind me. And then I realized that the sun was, blaring down on me, and then I started sweating. And then when I get hot, I get angry, and then I started getting so it was a
yell over. Did you yell over to Orchidia? The people's champ is washing out.
Yeah. I let her know.
Maybe if you tipped her enough, maybe she could have fanned you during the bit.
I should have. That's what I should have done.
We will talk about the other graded stake, though, which is the Maryland Sprint. What did you do pick 6-wise in here?
The Maryland Sprint. You know what? This is I'm sorry. I was just trying to remember exactly which one. Yeah, we talked about whether or not we were going to use this race in the contest or not. And I just kind of thought it was like a 2-horse race. There's only 2 horses I really was interested in, and that was Switzerland and Long Haul Bay. Neither one of them was I in love with. However, they're just faster than these other horses. I mean, Switzerland was always meant to be a good horse when Chad Brown had him. And then he ran a good race for Chad, finally, it took him forever to kind of find that Keeneland maiden race where he ran so fast early, and that's kind of when he caught the attention. And then he was just bad for a while. Then he wins, and then they switched him to Asmussen. So I think he's a talented horse. They might have figured him out for sure. So those are the only two. I guess Lewis Field is one that might get people's attention. But I think that he was kind of in the right place at the right time last time at Laurel. So those are really the only two that I was interested in. Give a shout out to our boys at 10 Strike Racing with Red Dragon Tattoo.
Great name. Do you know? I'm asking you a question. I'm pretty sure you don't know the answer to. Do you know where that name comes from?
Wasn't it a movie?
It could be, but I'm pretty sure. Knowing Marshall Graham's musical taste, I'm pretty sure that's a rock and roll reference name to the great Fountains of Wayne song, Red Dragon Tattoo. We'll have to ask him about that, but I do think it's an awesome name. Who knows? Maybe there's a film that he's a big fan of that I don't know.
There you go with your music and these guys with. You always pick. I was telling you yesterday on Outplay JK, all these musicians you like have real names, and it drives me nuts. The Steve Williams album By the Campfire that he did live. That was great. Who the hell is Steve Williams?
That's definitely going in the best of. I don't know if we use that one or the one from last Friday, but make a note, Producer Craig. The musicians with names is going straight to the best of. I think this is Long Haul Bay's race to lose, personally. I think, and I'll offer one caveat to that about how the track is playing, but just in terms of race design, I feel like he's going to get a really good trip, hopefully outside stalking, 2 to 3 speed horses in here, enough tactical foot not to be too far back. The problem would be if it does, with this crazy weather we're expecting, if it does end up playing to the inside. Heck, if it ends up playing to the inside, your friend Red Dragon Tattoo might become a little interesting as a big long shot in here. But the way I see this race playing out in my head, it's going to favor Long Haul Bay. So that would be one of the ones you mentioned. That would be one that I would want to press. And this leads neatly into a discussion, I hope, about wet track handicapping. With the weather being what it's been on the East Coast, especially Baltimore the last few days, we've received a ton of questions. We had a lot of the questions were specific to the Preakness, and I'll just cut that one off by saying I just don't think it's that relevant because those horses coming out of the Derby are all – now, granted, all wet tracks are not the same, et cetera, but at some point you just got to make the best inferences you can. And coming off that wet track, I would just assume that Derby form is going to hold. So I don't think there's some sneaky horse to move up in the Preakness because of a preference for off-going. I think you can kind of just look at the form of the Derby and go from there. But we also had some questions, and this is where I'll throw it to you, JK, about general wet track handicapping. What is it that you're looking for to assess whether a horse is going to move up in the wet?
Yeah, I'm not much of a breeder. Like, the breeding is going to lead me to who's going to like the slot. I mean, I'll look and I'll take a glance at it, but I don't typically do that. One of the things that I look for is I want horses who are going to be forwardly placed. We talked about it a million times on the show. Like, I really do. It talks to me. It speaks to me, like how much most horses don't appreciate getting that mud thrown in their face. So I want a horse who's going to be in the clear and be forward. And then, obviously you want to try to keep an eye on when a surface gets wet, it tends to lean in a direction, and whether it's inside or outside or whatever. So I try to identify those things. But I want a horse that's going to be forward. One of the main things I'll do is I'll go through the first thing I'll do before I even look at names or anything. And I just look to see which horses' early pace figures catch my attention as horses that are going to be forward. And then I'll go back and I'll handicap those horses individually. I want horses that are going to be forward on off tracks.
That's two really interesting and important ideas. One is sort of the universal bias of dirt racing, which is tilted to speed anyway. It sounds like you just feel like you turn that knob up to 11 when it comes to a wet track. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just don't want a closer. I don't usually like closers anyways, but I definitely don't want them when they're going to have to sit back there and eat all that dirt. Now, however, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not like, it's not like I toss closers. That's how I start with handicapping the race. Now, if it's going to be an all-out speed duel, you could still find a horse that can close, and especially a horse that's going to be on the outside will be in the clear.
That's what I was thinking about Long Haul Bay. That's the exact trip I was seeing for Long Haul Bay. If it's a day where the track seems pretty even, where ground loss isn't even that big of a factor, which you will see plenty of days in racetracks around North America, if you could stay out in the clear, in touch, I can still envision a good trip for him in the slop, even though part of what I like about him is that there's other speed. Then there's other days where ground loss not only means something, but can dictate the outcome of races, in which case a horse getting the trip there, closing from the 9 post, would have zero chance at all. And that's the other key, I think, to what you said when answering the original question, Jonathan, about be extra vigilant about looking for track biases when you're dealing with wet weather, because the way that the earlier races are flowing could very much influence what you're doing by the time you get to the middle of the day. And sort of famously, and this is a lot of the stuff I'm saying here is taken directly out of Betting with an Edge by Mike Maloney, so we should give him the shout out. But when there's so much rain as they've had this week in Baltimore, there's really only so much a track maintenance crew can do. So a lot of times it's not like a dry day when you see a rail and they do something in the middle of the day and it changes it. It is possible to get a sustained bias on a day like Preakness Saturday if the rain's going to be pretty constant. So it's something to keep an eye on. But we'd be remiss, and this is maybe a better move for me since you say you don't do too much of the pedigree stuff. I do like doing the pedigree stuff, and Formulator gives you a couple of tools. You can click on the dam and get a list of what all of her progeny have done on off tracks. That's one interesting metric. You can also just look at the individual PPs of the sire and the dam and see what and see what they did on off going. It's not a perfect translation. I would say, it seems to me, tell me if you agree or disagree, that in this day and age, most horses are all right in the slop. There are some outliers who aren't, and typically everybody knows that, and connections then would opt to scratch those horses. So it doesn't come up very often for me where a breeding angle is going to point me definitively in how I approach a off-track race. But it's a good thing to look, and every once in a while you can come up with a favorite that you have enough questions about because you look and the sire's one bad race was on an off-track, a situation which you'll see sometimes, and then decide to oppose this filly on the day. And you could occasionally come up with some interesting ideas with it. But do you think that's right, that it's often not that big a factor, breeding, for that reason?
Well, I guess my question is, what's the science behind it, right? What is it about the breeding that makes a horse like or dislike the slop? I mean, is it an action thing? Is it a feet thing?
I think it's a foot thing. I think it's sort of like turf. I've often heard them say that it's like the opposite of a turf hoof that you want. I've heard this so many different ways that I don't know what's true, but I'll just give you my best guess, is that, envision the pancake that you see on a turf horse that would tend to get stuck in muddy going, as opposed to, when I say pancake, I'm holding out my fist and my hand in front of my face with my 5 fingers extended. And that's my little imitation I'm doing here in the hotel room of a turf hoof. And then I'm closing my fingers into a fist, and I'm thinking that's supposedly the type of hoof, a little more like narrow, that gets in and out of the off-going better. That's sort of what I've heard. I'm not a horseman, obviously, and it's something we should ask somebody who knows a lot more. But that's my understanding, that it boils down to foot shape.
It's funny because then there's the weird science behind the idea that turf horses run well in the mud.
Exactly, which is completely contradictory, and I've never found that to be true. Have you?
No, I think that no, and I mean, I'm like I said, I'm not a huge believer in all of that anyway. I'm not a believer in it. I believe in it. I just don't subscribe to it. It's just because it's beyond me. So why try to use it into my analysis. I think maybe when it comes to when that happens, it's you get this impression that turf horses that run well in the mud is because off turf races have horses run in the mud and someone has to win.
Somebody has to win.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it.
The logic is just too crazy to even bother to dispel there. Hey,
Right.
We just got a question from Joe Pettit, the handicapping haberdasher. He says, do we know which Pimlico races are going to be part of the WHT contest on Saturday? Unable to find the information on the Santa Anita site. Has this decision been finalized by Nate Newby?
It is. Yeah, it's 11, 12, and 13. I think Nate said that he tweeted it. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. I will retweet it if he did. I'm looking.
Yeah, let's put the word out there, and that will certainly help on the podcast as well. 11, 12, and 13. I said I didn't want you to give your whole Pick 6 ticket out because I want people to go listen to you on Out of the Gate. But I will ask you this. Is there a particular race other than the ones we've talked about, a horse that stands out that you might want to look to key other bets besides the Pick 6 around?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting – to start the Pick 6, I think it's an interesting race. Let me scroll to it here. I believe it's race 8. Race 8. There's a horse in there. I believe the name is Mitole. Mitole. You know how to pronounce that, Pete?
It's very funny you said that because I was actually going to watch a replay to see what the caller said about it. And in that, I never finished that story from before. I had all my show notes out, and then my Skype was acting weird. And to get the show going up on time, I had to do a complete reboot, lost all my notes, and lost the opportunity to go back and watch Matole's last race to actually see how to pronounce the name. I apologize.
Well, look, he's going to be forward. He's running figures that, like, nothing has even really come close to here. But here's the problem. If you look back, 3 back, in the gazebo, his worst race, his worst figure, obviously than his debut as a 2-year-old, but his worst figure, he ran second, beaten a length and almost 2 lengths, and it was in a slop. And so does he like the slop? Does he not like the slop? So he's going to be, he's 3 to 5 on the morning line, and I would imagine that he'll stay around that area. So I'm going to use him as a single A because if he runs good, they're not going to beat him. But I'm also going to use Runaway for Simon Callahan, Curly's Rocket, and Old Time Revival, the horse that was the runoff horse in the Wood Memorial, who cut back in the slop and didn't run great. But I'm going to give him another shot. They're trying it again, and he's 20 to 1 on the morning line. So I'm going to use those 3 horses as B horses. I think there's an opportunity there. I think that if you can get started with a kind of a single A, then you're on the right track, and you can end it with a single and justify. And then you can also have a couple of dollars on the 6, 7, and 8 in case they upset it. What I would assume would be a big price. I think Mitole will be probably the second most singled horse in the Pick 6 outside of Justify.
Would you? Which of those outcomes would you be rooting for? Would you root for turning the 3 to 5 over and getting alive on some B tickets that might be worth something, or would you prefer to just have that single A win for the extra coverage it would give you?
Well, if you bet it correctly, you're supposed to have more on Mitole. I want to say Mitole. I'm just going to go with Mitole. If you bet it correctly, you'd have more on Mitole that you wouldn't be too upset either way. And I do like the idea of having that additional coverage later. So that's definitely the one that I would root for. But I wouldn't be upset if a 20 to 1 shot won.
All right, we've got a few minutes left. This is a good question. You could do a whole show on this question that came in from Josh, who says he's bet on horses maybe 50 times over the last 15 years, mostly in the last 4 years, has a good understanding on how to read form, speed figures, and understands who the better jockeys and trainers are, but he doesn't feel like his skill level has progressed the way he wanted it to. What would you recommend to take the next step as a horse player? He specifically says he's not looking to get involved in contests, but he is looking to play with more confidence generally. What would your advice be to Josh?
I would play in like low-level contests. I know that sounds, counterintuitive to what he suggested he's looking for, but here's why. We've talked about it before. Is I think playing in contests because you are encouraged in contests to take longer priced horses, you will then develop confidence that you have a skill at finding those types of horses. Before I started playing contests, I didn't know that I could confidently find a 12-to-1 shot. I didn't know I could do that. And then I got to a point where I got more comfortable and had more confidence that those kind of horses I can find. And so, that's definitely one thing. The other thing I would do is there's a lot of great books out there that you can read that can really, help you understand the game better. Obviously, Buyer on Speed, Betting Thoroughbreds in the 21st Century. And there's this one book that this guy with a beard wrote. I cannot remember the title of it.
All that guy with the beard did was turn on a tape recorder and listen to Mike Maloney talk. So give Mike – I can't plug myself, but I will plug Mike. Betting with an Edge. What I like about recommending Betting with an Edge for this specific conversation is I just think it's because it came out this year – it's not dated in any way, shape, or form. And it's also very, very nuts and bolts about the basics, but then also goes off into some subtler areas that are going to help you as a horse player. Feel free, Josh, to ask any follow-ups you have. But I do think you should consider contests, if only as a learning tool, something like publichandicapper.com. Another idea that pops to mind. You play on there. That gives you an opportunity to write your own analyses of races. Depending on how your brain works, the process of writing about a race could make you a better handicapper, just because it's going to force you not to take any shortcuts. You're going to be sitting there writing everything you think about a race. Another thing is networking, whether it's through horse racing Twitter, whether it's through going to contests, whether it's through going out to your local oval. Meet people with similar interests and talk to them, and you'll get so many ideas, things that work, things that don't work. I think it's a myth even that every conversation you have about racing has to be with somebody who's super sharp and going to tell you something you don't know. It can also be super helpful to talk to people who know less than you and just go through the process of explaining the fundamentals and thinking about them sort of from the ground up in a way that can really help crystallize what's important and separate what's important to you and your style from what's not important. And that's going to be different for different players.
The other thing is, and this is a topic that I've seen myself talking to a lot of different people about as of late, is, say you're a 30-minute a race handicapper, right? That's what he's doing at the moment. He's handicapping each race, takes him about 30 minutes. Cut that down. Handicap the race faster. Do it in 18 to 20 minutes. Spend that other 10 minutes constructing smart wagers. And Pete's book and Pete and Mike's book's a great example of finding better ways to construct tickets. There's also the version of Steve Chris' book, Exotic Betting, that can help you construct better tickets. But the problem is not if you're not finding the success that you are wanting, it's not always the handicapping. People always think it's the handicapping. It's not the handicapping. It's how you're betting it. So try to step your game up in terms of learning different betting strategies and how to construct tickets, and don't even worry about. Just take a pause on your handicapping for a second and make sure that that's part of your curriculum. You're stepping up in that area, and I think you'll see a lot better results.
I once had a professional player. I'll give him a shout out. My buddy Dave Cascuna, who I haven't seen in a few years, unfortunately, but a great guy. And one of the guys, Frank Scatoni, and I interviewed for 6 Secrets of Successful Bettors back in the day. And he said that he believed there were professional horse players who you could give them just like a slightly above average, a B-plus set of picks on the day's races, and they would be able to make money through their betting skill. There's no opposite corollary of that. And the point of the story to me is it speaks to what JK was just saying. It's not – a lot of times success or failure as a horse player, financially speaking, it's not about the handicapping. It's about the wagering. And if that's an area you've neglected, it's definitely one you should be spending time with. And the greatest tool for all of this stuff is it's not sexy, but record keeping is an amazing tool because our memories trick us. They trick us all the time. Like the thing that, without records, I honestly don't know how many times the co-workout angle has let us down lately. JK remembered 2 times. In my memory, it's like 4 times. And, I honestly have no idea which one of us is correct. And that could be the same thing, even about, you might think, oh, I always win with this trainer, or I always lose with this trainer. But it's not actually true. It's just that's what you're remembering. When you have figures there in black and white to tell you how you're doing, which pools you're doing well in, which class of races you're doing well in. Some people keep records where they track the reason they made the wager, which reasons that are promoting success in your horse playing as opposed to failure. This is all stuff you can learn when you keep records. And if you're looking to take a step forward, Josh, as you mentioned, that's something else you should really consider doing. Again, feel free to ask any follow-ups on that. We are just about out of time, JK. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up this Preakness edition of the DRF Players Podcast? Are you still there? Am I still here?
Yeah, my bad. I muted you. I was talking too. No, I said I'm super excited about the weekend, and obviously we have a lot of listeners that hopefully are heading out here, and Pete and I will obviously look forward to seeing you. But I wanted to thank you guys now for the support. Obviously this is something we've been working on, and something that we really believe in, and we think that there's a lot of positives, and we think that this contest works for everyone. It's a great deal for everyone. It's a great deal for the players. It's a great deal for the racetracks, for the horsemen, and so we're really excited about it, and we hope it works out well.
I think it will. We'll be talking about it a bunch when we are back. Again, there'll be some live coverage, whether it's written tweets or hopefully we'll be able to get some video stuff up there. You're going to want to see this jacket JK's busting out on Sunday. Plus, I bought a new hat, so that'll be fun. We'll be back on Tuesday to talk about the Preakness. You know what? I'm going to hit you. Producer Craig said we can run long. Here's the question I want to ask you before we get off the air. Justify's Triple Crown bid. Do you want to see it happen? Do you want to see him win the Triple Crown?
Yeah, I mean, the only reason that I wouldn't is because traffic's going to be a nightmare getting to Belmont. I mean, that's the only reason, right? No, of course, it's a ton of fun. I was there for California Chrome when he didn't. I was there when Pharaoh did, and it was exciting. It was a ton of fun. I thought it was cool for the sport. I don't think it was like, I don't think it was like life changing for the sport, but it always gets, it's one way for us to get in the mainstream media, and it's one way for us to do, to sporting moments like that are exciting. So I'd love for that to happen. I'd love for it to happen.
You reminded me there was a guy with a bandana who made a comment that I meant to address, but we'll save that. Justify probably wins. It'll be just as relevant on Tuesday, so I'll put a pin in that one. There is some small part of me, and I'm getting over it, but there's some small part of me that didn't want another Triple Crown so close to Pharaoh. But then, just as a fan, I'm talking, putting aside what it would be, economic impact, etc. However, the more I think about it, the mind just keeps going back to the 1970s and having, 3 and 5 years, and maybe this is just maybe it's just what's going to happen, and it's kind of cool, and it doesn't make sense to. Not like I'd be rooting against him actively or something, but there was just some reptilian part of my brain that wasn't sure if I wanted another one so soon. To Pharaoh. Do you understand that logic at all, or does it just sound weird?
Yeah, you broke up with a girl and you don't want her to date anyone else.
I'm not sure that's the exact right analogy.
No, I get that. The thing about it is that the 12 or 13 failed attempts prior to that, I think, cemented the idea that this is a special thing, and just because it happened in quickly again doesn't change the fact that it's a really hard thing to accomplish. And 12 or 13 or whatever the number is, really good horses didn't get that job done. And not even 13 didn't get it done. There was also probably another handful of 5 or 6 or 7 that didn't win the Derby, like Curlin or so they weren't even alive for the Triple Crown. But it's a hard thing to get done, and so that won't ever change for me.
All right. I think that's a good answer. There'll obviously be plenty of time to talk more about this, especially if Justified gets the job done on Saturday night. Going to be very fun, a very interesting race from a sporting point of view. And obviously we'll throw down a few dollars as well. We'll be back to talk about it all on Tuesday. Thanks to Jonathan Kinchin. Thanks to producers Craig and AJ. Travis Stone provides that great voiceover at the beginning. And Willie Nile with our theme song. More of his music at willienile.com. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.